You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to bonus episode number 8 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, and with me, as he always is, my good brother and good friend, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to bonus episode number 8.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and we've got another 2 chapters of the Batman The Adventures Continue digital first comic to talk about today, and boy oh boy did they give us quite a bit of content from a story perspective, from an art perspective, just so much to talk about this week.
Content and controversy, I think, is what we would go with these 2 chapters as we get into it here. Without looking, Liam, can you accurately describe the parts, issue, and chapters of this edition of Batman: The Adventures Continue?
So this will be issue when it comes out. This will be issue 4. It'll be chapters 7 and 8, if I'm not mistaken. And the story is, of course, called The Darker Knight because it features the DCAU debut of one Azrael. So, yeah, we have our digital chapters 7 and 8 here to talk about, which will eventually make up issue number 4 of the physical comic.
Correct, and it's The Darker Knight part 1 and 2 that we will be covering today. So before we get into breaking down the actual comic itself, Liam, I did want to give a shout out. So through social media, the magic of social media, there's a lot of bad stuff and terribleness that happens on social media. But every now and then there's some good that comes from the existence of social media. And just give a shout out. So we've been able to speak with and certainly interact with a lot of the creators and different voice actors and stuff. Monica Kubina, who's the colorist on this entire series, has been very kind to us, and we were able to send her a little gift package last week, which was awesome. But she was actually able to give us some insight that one Randy Mayor, who is the assistant art director at DC Comics, is the one who was responsible for the title cards that have been at the beginning of each of the digital first issues. So these are not included in the physical copy. So if you have just picked up the physical copies, you may not know what we're talking about. But you can actually check out our Instagram. We always post the title cards when they debut, or they're actually included with this episode on our website at DCAUreview.com. You can check them out. But these are sort of homages. We've talked about them, Liam, in each of the episodes thus far. They're just a little homage, a little nod to the origins of Batman the Animated Series with those title cards that were just so iconic. It just adds a little bit of flair, and it's a little bit. It just feels like we're in the right place when we see these each week.
Yeah, absolutely. That, especially, obviously we didn't get those with the new Batman Adventures, but that original run, the Batman the Animated Series, Eric Radomski, one of the co-creators of the series, drew every single one of those title cards, and that's such an iconic part of this series. You think about ones like Harley and Ivy or On Leather Wings or something like that. Some of the really stunning Beware the Great Ghost. Some of those really stunning title cards that would open every show. And that's such a big part of that original Batman the Animated Series run. And it was such a brilliant idea to include that as sort of a way of welcoming us all back into this world.
Yeah, and so the ones included for these 2 issues of The Darker Knight by Randy Mayor are just 2 really, really awesome looking pieces. And I think when we saw the first one for part 1, you even commented that it reminded you, like, this could be a straight out of the original Batman the Animated Series run. So very, very well done. Wanted to give Mr. Mayer a shout out on that one. All right, Liam, let us let's jump into the breakdown of this week's 2 parts. Issue number 4, as you mentioned, chapters 7 and 8 of the digital first Batman: The Adventures Continue comic. As you already mentioned, so we know that this is the debut, and we knew that from both the covers and the preview at the end of our previous issue, that this was going to be the debut of Jean-Paul Valley, aka Azrael. We're introduced to him after discovering that Catwoman, who makes her first appearance in this mini-series, it has stolen something of value from the Order of Saint Dumas, which is traditionally where Azrael has his origins found in, which is this sort of religious cult, I guess is sort of how it would be described. They're kind of religious assassins, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a little Assassin's Creedy. It's a little they're big fans of the Old Testament God. Like they're big vengeance. They're sort of the avenging angels of I don't know if they ever specifically say in the books that it's meant to be like the real traditional Judeo-Christian God, but that's certainly implied with a lot of the imagery and stuff you see. And yeah, the idea is that they're sort of Azrael is this sort of this fist of vengeance for this church, for this Order of Saint Dumas. And yeah, as we find out in this version of the DCAU, apparently Bruce Wayne, before becoming Batman, actually spent some time training with that order before leaving.
I thought that was an interesting way to incorporate that. I think that has been traditionally, at least with Batman the Animated Series, has been the way they've sort of incorporated some of those villains. It's been a tradition, as we know in one of the episodes that we most recently covered in Batman the Animated Series, which was Night of the Ninja, I believe. That one, it links Batman's training to the villain of that episode, going back to his training in karate and his training in the same dojo as Kyudai Ken. So linking Batman's training, we also know that it comes up in the Zatanna episode and several other instances where Batman's training leads to him coming in contact with people that he once interacted with. So I felt like that was a very effective way to bring in the Order of Saint Dumas, and having him be familiar with Jean-Paul Valley in this sense, in that they are both trained similarly, and they're both sort of two sides to one coin. Bruce sort of just used it for the physical training and for maybe the mental self-discipline, whereas Jean-Paul Valley actually bought into it hook, line, and sinker, including the religious aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting aspect of it, because that's sort of the whole rest of this issue, as we talked about, as Catwoman steals this supposedly blessed or magic or enchanted, whatever, this shawl that's supposed to have great healing powers from the Order, which is sort of what sets Azrael after her, and sort of where we pick up the story is Batman chasing her, and then Azrael showing up and being very ready to kill her, and Batman sort of talks him off the ledge based on their sort of mutual history, and they find out she was actually hired by the Penguin. And then we're sort of having this clash of ideals of sort of Batman, who, as you said, sort of used the Order of Saint Dumas to perhaps better himself physically, but he never bought into the religion side of it, whereas this is very much a holy mission that there are wrongs that need to be righted, and Azrael is the one that's going to right these wrongs. And Batman's sort of the whole time trying to talk him down, and he's like, hey, if you promise to be cool, I'll make you a new suit. You can fit in with the rest of us here in Gotham, and we can work together here, and everybody wins, nobody has to die, and all that. And sort of throughout the issue, Azrael just throughout the rest of part 1 and then part 2 there, it's just Azrael getting sort of more and more violent, especially with the Penguin, as he's just sort of on this really single-minded crusade to get this shawl back.
Yeah, and that to me, that mirrors the character of Jean-Paul Valley, Azrael, whatever you want to call him, from the early 90s. That was the whole ultimate climax of the Nightfall storyline, was obviously Batman gets his back broken, is unable to carry on the mantle of Batman at the time, and passes it to Jean-Paul Valley, who just becomes increasingly more and more violent, more and more out of control. Even gets into a fight with Tim Drake Robin at one point, and Batman ultimately has to battle him in order to reclaim the mantle of the Bat. So seeing them sort of tease that progressively more violent aspect was interesting. Backtracking just for a second here is I wanted to ask you about, what did you think of them sort of explaining away the Bat costume as well? We wanted you to look more uniform, so Alfred and I invented this costume for you.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of just felt like we have to justify him being in that Batman-ish suit, and that, I mean, I think this felt less shoehorned to me than the Dark Knight Returns robot suit in the first issue. But yes, it still definitely feels like, well, the toy is him in the bat suit, so we have to find some sort of reason to justify him coming to Gotham. And I guess you could have just already had him be in the suit,
right?
And the idea, and sort of come at it from a different narrative perspective, that he's just there rather than being there for like this single issue. He's there to clean up Gotham and become the Batman can't be. Sort of more playing on the direct links to that Nightfall story. But yeah, I mean, I think what they did was, while yes, it was definitely a little a little sudden. I think it was, like I said, I didn't think it was quite as shoehorned as maybe some of the other toy tie-in moments have been so far.
Do you think that Batman and Alfred just had like a whole bunch of extra Teflon and carbon fiber like hanging around, and they were just like, well, we were going to use this for a suit for Bruce, but you know what? We'll just retrofit it to you instead.
Yeah, like maybe it's like it's the helmet from the Firefly suit.
Ooh.
And from the anti-Firefly suit, and they just painted it, and then I'm sure he always has a couple extra capes lying around, so
love it.
So
hey, I like
that.
Yeah,
so maybe he I imagine he has to buy that stuff in bulk, so
sure,
probably has a bunch of just bat-shaped clothing around, capes and bat helmets and stuff. So he just repurposed that, or like an old bat motorcycle helmet or something to fit here.
I love where your head's at. It makes as much sense as anything else. Backtracking for just a second, do you have any thoughts on the original Azrael costume that they used in this for this before he changes over to the Bat costume?
The only one I thought of, and I think a lot of people have probably pointed it out, is that it looks very Phantasm-y.
Right.
It's because obviously in the comics it's sort of, he does have the hood, but the mask it's very much just like a mask. It may have some sort of design on it, but this one is pretty much, it looks very similar to the Phantasm design, with that sort of skull helmet under, with the hood over top. So that was, I liked it. Like, I think it's certainly striking, but yeah, that was sort of my thought. In fact, when the cover for the first issue came out, with all of the villain faces in the building with Batman standing on top, I remember there was some discussion I had online on our Twitter at DCAU Review, where people were asking, like, wait, is that Phantasm? Is that maybe Azrael? We don't know what's going on. Like, and so yeah, I guess. But once you see it with the color scheme and everything, I think it's a pretty striking look. I wouldn't mind a future DC direct release of this costume as well.
All right, moving forward from that. So once we find out that Penguin is the person that hired Catwoman to get the shawl of Magdalene, Jean-Paul and confront Penguin at the Iceberg Lounge, and we are introduced to a original character, I believe, that has never debuted, and I'm curious as to if he'll ever make an appearance in comic form ever again, and that is one Mr. Wing, who is a giant anthropomorphic bird.
Yeah, so I certainly had some questions about this. Whether or not, so is this just some strange sort of metahuman? Is this an early splicer? Is this, a leftover experiment from Dr. Milo in the original? I guess they say in Justice League that Dr. Milo is the guy who created splicers. So, is this
right.
another early splicer experiment? I'm genuinely curious as to what this guy is, because he just kind of shows up at the end of part 1, and then in part 2 he talks he talks like a normal person. So you would imagine at some point he was a normal human being. So I'm fascinated and very curious as to the origins of Mr. Wing.
So my speculation, and bear with me now, this is my headcanon since we have nothing to go off of so far, but just as there is a hidden gorilla city where there are giant gorillas that are able to communicate with humans and communicate verbally and are far advanced beyond your normal capable gorillas, I do believe that there might be a bird city where giant birds also exist, and Mr. Wing escaped from Bird City, or was perhaps banished from Bird City for being too radical with his ideas, and he made his way to Gotham, where he heard that there was a gentleman that went by the name of the Penguin, thinking that this was somebody who had also at one point escaped from Bird City, only to come to find out that it was just a man who calls himself the Penguin. And here we have it. He made his way there, and he's the Penguin's wingman now.
There you go. I love that. That's
Bird City. That's right.
Until we hear otherwise, that is the official origins of Mr. Wing, as far as I'm concerned.
Bird City. So he's interestingly visual. I mean, he's in it for just a very few panels. He's the end of part 1, chapter 7, and then he's in the opening scene, obviously, at chapter 8, part 2. So I did not love this character. I'll just say that.
It's very random. It feels like it could have just been some random for what they needed to happen, which was Batman to be distracted fighting something while Azrael ran after Penguin, and obviously, as we see in the few panels that followed up, just brutalize him to get information about where who he sold the straw to. For what they needed, you could have just had a bunch of random thugs,
right,
and just have Batman get overwhelmed for a minute, and then go from there. But I mean, look, like I said, it's a cool visual. The art of Mr. Wing is very impressive. But yes, it was a pretty random inclusion. And obviously we don't get a lot of context of who he is or how he came to be. Batman dispatches him pretty easily before running after Azrael and the Penguin. So yeah, it is a pretty random insertion, but hey, if we get a DC Direct Mr. Wing figure somewhere down the line, it'll all be worth it.
Please don't make me have to buy a DC Direct Mr. Wing figure. We're not asking for that, please.
I might be asking for it.
Oh my gosh, there's 350 other characters I'd rather see before a Mr. Wing figure. Please don't give them any ideas. All right. So moving on, so the part 2, we figure out that there's been somebody else, so that Penguin was sort of like the middleman, but there's a third level to this stuff.
Yes.
He was hired to hire Catwoman to get this shawl. So there's like multiple layers of hirings going on here. Sounds like a pyramid scheme, if you ask me. But we find out that the person behind the hiring of the hiring is in fact revealed to be Victor Freeze. And Liam, this is where there has been some significant controversy, at least in the DCAU community, about what happens next.
Yeah, so this leans on a lot of stuff. So famously, I know at the very least Bruce Timm has said that because some of the creators, not all of the creators who made Sub-Zero, Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero, the movie, were involved because a lot of them were already working on Superman at that point, by the time that came out. So I know at least Bruce Timm has intimated that he was not a big fan of that ending where they bring Nora back to life, because he felt that it hurt the Mr. Freeze character, and and if you watch the new Batman Adventures appearance of Mr. Freeze, they basically just say, well, she married her doctor, she ran off, and Mr. Freeze never went to see her, and we find out it's because his disease got worse, and now he's just a head in a jar. So it's like very quickly they're like, well, if his whole motivation was this grief that he felt from his wife's death, and now his wife's not dead anymore, I guess they felt like it hurt the character and made it harder for him to play that part. So they don't retcon her death yet, but they do sort of write her out of the story and give Mr. Freeze a new tragedy to sort of motivate him. And here but of course, in the meantime, in some of the tie-in comics in Batman Gotham Adventures and Batman Adventures Volume 2, they actually did follow up on a lot of that story with Mr. Freeze meeting the doctor who saved his wife's life and who she ended up remarrying with, and then later on there's this issue where Clayface disguises himself as Nora and sort of convinces Mr. Freeze to help him on this caper. And then finally in Batman Adventures, one of the last issues of that series, we do in fact actually get the reunion of Nora and Mr. Freeze, and it sort of sets up some future, his head ends up lost in like the Arctic at the end of that, and I guess we can assume from there was when the future Derek Powers would find him and take him, and that's how he ends up where he is in Batman Beyond. But so all of that is sort of thrown out of any potential continuity here, as Mr. Freeze needed the Shaw, as it turns out, because Nora died again because her treatment didn't take. So I guess that's frustrating. And before we get into like what we think about tie-in comics and stuff, like I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with this. Like,
for sure,
I've always enjoyed reading the tie-in comics. I was actually independent of all of this, was just in my spare time I was reading some of those Batman Adventures issues just for fun. And there's a lot of great stories, and it's cool to have that supplemental material. But since I wasn't totally surprised by this, just because I knew at least some of the creators of the series didn't like the idea of Nora being alive. So I'm not totally surprised that a Paul Dini and Alan Burnett penned story sort of went back to correct that wrong, if that makes sense.
No, I think you're right. I think it does. And so there's three different issues that you mentioned. The first one, I believe, was Gotham Adventures number 5. Mm-hmm. And that one was actually written by Ty Templeton, ironically, who of course is doing the artwork for the Batman the Adventures Continue series. But the other two issues that you mentioned, which I believe was Gotham Adventures 51 and Batman Adventures 14 Volume 2?
15, I think.
15 Volume 2. Okay, 15 Volume 2. You're right. Neither of those had any of the people that are involved in this project writing them, or artistically, or any of it. So those were done sort of on their own by great writers and people that were responsible at the time for doing that. My thought process on this is sort of all of the time, and like you said, I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. I think all of the tie-in comics can be loosely canon. I think it's the Watchtower database guys who have the idea that like it's canon until proven otherwise, which I appreciate. That's fine. That's a fine strategy to take. I think what happens though is when things start to contradict each other, as they do with this point. To me, we see that happen all of the time in main continuity DC. How many times have stories had to be rewritten or explained away, or things that were established in one comic are just completely disregarded and thrown away in another comic? The reason why this happens is because that you have so many different independent creators who are responsible for different storylines. And while a certain storyline may be important to you or for the time, there comes a time where somebody else gets to hold the ball for a little while, and they kind of get to decide what is and what isn't. So I know that's hard with this DCAU stuff because it's so near and dear to all of us.
Yeah, for sure. I've always kind of we were talking about this off the air, but I've always sort of looked at any of these tie-in books kind of the same way I looked at like the Daredevil Netflix series, which is theoretically, I guess, set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they never really overlap. And quite frankly, and especially now that Disney's deal with Netflix is over, if they decide, hey, we want to introduce Daredevil or a villain that was in that series, there isn't going to be somebody that goes, well, we can't because that character was already introduced in Daredevil. They'll just go, well, I don't care. I'm making a major movie and I want to use that character. So and that doesn't mean that the show isn't good. Like I really enjoyed that Daredevil show, and it was cool to have sort of, sly references to the larger universe while telling this story. And I know that's not a 1-to-1 comparison because like Captain America and Iron Man didn't show up in the Daredevil show, right, versus these Gotham Adventures or Batman Adventures books where we are actually following the exact same characters. I know that's not a perfect comparison, but that's kind of how I've always personally looked at them. It's like, it's supplemental material. There are a lot of really fun, great stories to be told. But yeah, there's always that chance that that it's going to be thrown out when something happens. I mean, a perfect example of that is, there's the original Batman Adventures Volume 1, I think it's issue 25. He teams up with a long-haired Superman, and they fight a Lex Luthor with orange hair and a beard. Because at the time, no one imagined that they were going to do a Superman the Animated Series, nor that it would cross over with Batman. And then eventually that happened. And doesn't mean that's not a fun issue or that it's a good story, but it does mean that it doesn't really fit in the world anymore. And again, even with this new series, there's always the chance that there will be another DCAU movie or limited series. Who knows? This wonderful world of streaming we're in, I feel like that's certainly always a possibility now. That could throw out some of the stuff that happened in this comic. So yeah, like as frustrating as that can be, especially if, like we said, if you're coming at it more from a historian standpoint, or you're trying to hammer out a specific timeline, like our buddies over at the Watchtower database do. Like I completely understand why this is kind of frustrating and annoying. But that's just kind of how I've always personally viewed any of these tie-in books, is like, they're awesome stories and a lot of them are really fun and it's set in the same universe, but there's always going to be that chance, as you pointed out, that a new writer or a new show or whatever, a new movie is going to come up and they're going to change stuff just because. just
Right.
because they feel like it, or because they didn't like a certain story, or they just want to use a certain character that they didn't get a chance to use in an earlier run. There's a lot of variables to it, and yeah. So like I said, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. If you don't like this issue because you preferred the version where Nora comes back to life and has these new adventures with Mr. Freeze, we're certainly not telling you you're wrong. It's just personally, like I said, I've always sort of I've looked at these tie-in comics as sort of being on borrowed time as far as like continuity's sake goes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing that I look to is that, like I said, those other issues were written by people that were certainly charged with at the time of storytelling for this universe. But looking at this, these are two of the people that were responsible for the birth of the original DCAU. There would be no DCAU if it wasn't for Alan Burnett and Paul Dini. Those guys were huge. So that's kind of, to me, looking at them deciding how the characters, they didn't create the characters, well, with the exception of Harley Quinn, obviously, but they didn't create these characters, but they did sort of have the narrative and the mindset behind where things were going or how things should go. And I sort of defer to their creative ideas behind something. It was funny. Ty Templeton even commented yesterday. We had, again, the magic of social media. Ty Templeton, somebody had mentioned on one of his pictures that he had messed up. He and Paul Dini, quote, had messed up continuity because of this last issue. And he didn't know exactly what they were talking about. So, we mentioned to them, to Ty, that this was referring to the Nora Freeze thing. And he said he supposes, this is a direct quote, "Yes, I suppose it tosses out some Batman Adventures continuity with the soap opera elements introduced there. I noticed that while drawing the issue, obviously." But he didn't lean one way or the other as to whether or not he approved or disapproved. I thought it was interesting that he referred to the Nora storyline that was written as soap opera elements. But he, as we mentioned, he was responsible, in at least for the first of those 3 issues there, in sort of shaping that storyline going forward. So he didn't seem to have too many issues with it or voice any there. So all that to say, like you said, I don't think there's right or wrong for this. To me, I think taking a look at the positives and the negatives of this series, we've pointed out certain things that have been good, things that have been bad. I didn't have a problem with the Nora thing. To me, Mr. Freeze needs to be this tragic character, and if you prefer the tragedy to be that he was reunited and ultimately then separated again from Nora Freeze, by all means, that's fine. For my sake, this to me feels more like a more of a tragic end to his story that we would ultimately see ended in the Batman Beyond run. So to me, I prefer this storytelling, but if you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. For within the narrative of the story, forgetting about the other continuities that it might hurt. I did think it was like it's a really dark moment as you sort of come to realize, like, oh, Mr. Freeze has it, and then they don't straight up show you Nora's corpse, but you sort of see glimpses of it as he's thrown the shawl over her, and Azrael is sort of trying to explain to him that the shawl only works, it heals, it doesn't bring people back from the dead though, and he sort of can't accept that because, again, I do think that there's something to that, and even if it's a different version of it, it is kind of the same story told in those Batman Adventures comics, where he had maybe some small peace of mind knowing that Nora was alive again and that she had gone off to live her happy ending, and then it was taken from her a second time. So it's still kind of the same. He had her, she got sick, he becomes Mr. Freeze, he thinks she's dead. he gets her back. She is healed. She goes on to live her life, and then she dies. So it's still kind of that same thing where he loses her, he finds her, he loses her again, even if it's told in a different and more gruesome way. And yes, to Mr. Templeton's point, less romantic, less soap opera-y, and more just straight tragedy in that element. But it does, I think, still capture some of those same elements of those stories, just in a very different way.
Yeah, I agree completely. All right, so moving on through the end of this story, the shawl that, as we mentioned, Mr. Freeze's purpose for trying to obtain the shawl was so that he could revive Nora, which is interesting. I guess the lore of the Lazarus pit is not as widely known as one might think. So he decides to try and get the shawl of Magdalene, which has reported healing powers. He and Azrael confronts him first and is attacked. And Bruce has to come in and save Azrael, defeats Mr. Freeze at the same time, and ultimately uses the shawl, sort of. It's sort of implied that the shawl may have worked. Bruce is speculative, but the shawl, he puts the shawl over Azrael after Azrael has had his head or his body frozen solid in ice to try and revive him. So he seems to think that Azrael's resiliency helped him recover. Azrael certainly credits the shawl as the reason that he was healed. But they have this sort of poignant conversation where they talk about a quote unquote next time if they are to team up again in the future, and then they sort of part ways, and then we are left with the final 3 panels of this week's issue, which I thought, Liam, was the perfect segue, the perfect sort of cliffhanger into next week's issue.
Yeah, it's a great cliffhanger. We have very little Red Hood in these 2 issues, or excuse me, Mysterious Stranger that's watching Batman. We see him a little bit at the beginning of part 1, chapter 7. We see him watching Batman chase Catwoman and then confront Azrael for the first time, and then we didn't see much of him again until right at the end, where he's sort of narrating. There's this narration from Batman about how, you have to cherish your allies and protect them as best you can, because he's dealt with tragedy in his own right, and the allies never last, or something like that. And that's juxtaposed with Jason. You see him sitting on a Ferris wheel, and he's sort of looking at something through binoculars, and it pans down, and it is in fact the Joker. And you see the reflection in a mirror of Jason looking at him, and the Joker kind of noticing Jason as the issue ends. And that's a friggin' phenomenal cliffhanger as far as these issue goes.
Yeah, so it looks like that. So as we mentioned, this is technically issue 4. These 2 parts where it was issue 4. This is a 6-issue miniseries. So we have 2 issues left after this issue. And so it looks like we're finally going to, based on what the story says, it's showdown at Amusement Mile, which is, as you said, he's on a Ferris wheel at an amusement park. So you have to imagine that we're going to get some Mysterious Stranger action in the next issue, perhaps a confrontation between him and the person that could be responsible for his death, as he was in the main DC continuity. Who's to know? Who's to say? We're kind of left with that great cliffhanger there. But yeah, very excited to see what happens in the next issue. Briefly, Liam, we'll talk a little bit. We have talked about it, I think, each and every week here when we've done these reviews. But man, oh man, I think these 2 issues artistically, between the art that Ty Templeton drew and the coloring by Monica Gubina, I think each issue seems to top the next as far as just the beauty of these images, and these 2 issues are no exception to that.
Absolutely. Like we said, shoehorned toy placement notwithstanding, that Azrael Batsuit fits so well into this universe, into this style of art. And I loved seeing that. The scene where he's coming off of brutalizing the Penguin. It's a great shot of him sort of holding the Penguin by his lapels, and then Batman sort of standing in the background with this really expressive look on his face. It really felt like it jumped right out of the show to me. Some of these, that's one thing I don't think I've appreciated as much as I should have so far. Is just some of the way you can still show Batman's, he's very expressive despite being this sort of grim guy in this black cowl. You can still, there's still so much expression in his face when he sees moments like that. Yeah, I thought that was great. I really love. I don't know what it was, but I've never been a giant fan of the new Batman Adventures Mr. Freeze look, but in this comic, I was like, gosh, that looks great. Like, and I think part of it I really loved. I feel like it was a little like the blues on the suit were a little brighter. I don't know if that's compared to maybe some of his other comic book appearance, but I don't know. The suit just really popped to me in a way that it generally hasn't in other comics or even the new Batman Adventures episode that he appears in. Like, but I was like, man, that Mr. Freeze suit looks good this time. I don't know exactly what it was, but that's credit to Ty Templeton and Monica Cabina, I guess, because I was like, that's the best that Mr. Freeze suit has ever looked to me.
Yeah, I there were two things that stood out. I mean, we already talked about the original Azrael costume, the red that kind of pops in that opening scene where Batman is chasing Catwoman through the city, pursuing her as he's chasing her there. The skies, the blood red skies, everything about that is just gorgeous. Later on in that issue, the scene where Azrael is confronting Penguin, and there's a shot where he's knocking a glass of champagne out of his hands, sort of backhanding the champagne away. It's just, oh man, I think I screenshotted it and sent to you that day. I was like, holy cow, like this is just gorgeous. Everything about it. I think, looking at some of Mr. Templeton's original artwork, I feel like the characters in this are a lot less stiff than I've always loved his work, but something about the way that he's drawn this series of comics, they seem a lot less stiff and a lot more, which is funny to say for a cartoon's two-dimensional anyway, but it gives it more of a 3D look. And I think just friend of the show, Monica's colors have just been perfect each and every issue. So I think some of the coloration, the pop, and I think honestly some of it is the digital aspect of it. When you have the digital first comics, the digital pops a little bit more sometimes than the stuff in your hands. Obviously, we're big proponents of the physical issues. Definitely encourage you to go out and pick up. Issue 2 is now available, so if you can go support your local comic store and in picking that up. But the digital comics are also fun because those colors are so vibrant when you have it on, whether it's on your phone or an iPad or your laptop. There's something about it where the colors are just so crisp and pop so well.
Yeah, there's a great scene. Probably my favorite panel of either chapter is as Batman sort of talking with Catwoman after Azrael has disappeared. He gets a call from Alfred, who alerts him that he has a guest, and as it cuts to Alfred in a panel, and Azrael is holding the flaming sword to Alfred's throat, and Alfred is just completely deadpan, because again, as we've established in our regular show between episodes like Star-Crossed or even our recent review of the Static Shock episode Hard as Nails, nothing can surprise Alfred anymore. So he's just, of course there's some red religious zealot holding a flaming sword to my neck. Like, what else would happen? It's Wednesday after all. But again, the coloration's great, the fire coming off of the sword and everything, and then also I just love the expression that they gave Alfred in that scene, where he's so done with all of this, and is still the same Alfred that we know from all of the various DCAU appearances he made. So yeah, that scene especially, I think that might be my single favorite panel of the of either chapter.
Yeah, it's really, really good. We say it each and every week, but that we've done these, the artwork continues to just be outstanding. So I know a friend of the show, Monica, tends to listen to these episodes. So keep up the good work, Monica. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. You and Mr. Templeton are making these super, super enjoyable. All right, Liam. So I guess now that we've sort of gone through everything here, we tend to give a score for this a standard out of 10 as opposed to out of 40 that we do on our standard episodes. I would say that for me, these continue to get better and better. I really enjoyed this storyline, albeit with its faults. Maybe could have done with a little less Mr. Wing. Maybe one less villain too. We didn't really get a chance to talk about that, but it kind of does feel a little overstuffed at points.
Definitely. I mean, you introduce Catwoman at the start, and then she's sort of thrown away right away to introduce Azrael, who obviously isn't a straight up villain, but is still a new character and a character that's going to pull focus. And then you're right, you have the Penguin stuff, and then that being him being a middleman between Catwoman and, as we would come to find out, Mr. Freeze. Yes, it's jam packed, and on one hand, it's cool, like we said, to see all of these characters pop up. I'm not complaining from an art perspective, but yeah, from a narrative perspective, I think it's definitely we're definitely jam packed as far as characters to be used. Like, it was honestly probably a good thing that Batgirl or Robin weren't also somehow thrown into this story, because between Batman and Azrael and Penguin and Catwoman and Mr. Freeze, we were pretty stuffed.
Yeah, which, I mean, it almost makes you wish that this had been a 10-issue miniseries or 12-issue, maybe to let some of these characters breathe a little bit. But with that said, I'm giving this my highest score to date so far for the Batman The Adventures Continue series. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10.
Wow. Yeah, I think I'll go 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I think this is some of the best art in any of the issues so far. And like I said, even if it's a different take on sort of Mr. Freeze's second act, but sort of between where we see him in the original series and where we see him in Batman Beyond, it's a different take. But like I said, I think it still kind of hits the same notes that the other versions did. So yeah, I enjoyed this quite a bit as well.
Absolutely. Couple parting things here, Liam. We did see a preview of some of the from the DC solicits of a couple new covers for, I guess that was issue 5, which both had images of Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing, featured on them. Speculation: do you feel like we're going to get a Nightwing appearance here? Where, as we mentioned, we're 2 issues away from this miniseries being over, and no sign of Dick as of yet.
I honestly don't know, because he's been on the cover of at least he was on the cover of issue 2, and he was on the cover of the variant cover for issue number 1. So I think they're kind of just letting the artists who are doing these covers not necessarily draw whatever they want, but as far as like what characters they want to use. I hope so. Since this is the quote unquote A cover, I'm hoping that means he'll pop up. Plus, as I mentioned, I think in our previous bonus episode, I think I would really, really love there to be a scene where Jason interacts with both Tim and Dick. I'd like to see all the Robins together. Regardless of how this reveal goes, whether they do just straight up say that there was a third Robin we just never talked about between Dick Grayson and Tim Drake taking up the roles. Or whether or not it's an alternate reality, or he's a completely different identity altogether, or something else. I would still really like to see a scene of these 3 Robins all together. So I'm fingers crossed. I'd really like to see him, but like I've said, he's been on the cover of a few other issues and hasn't yet appeared. So I'm certainly hopeful for it, but I'm not really sure what to expect anymore.
For sure. And speaking of characters not yet to appear, so we know we've discussed this in past bonus episodes as well, but this whole miniseries came out of the series of figures that DC, at the time DC Collectibles, now DC Direct, was offering. And there are several characters that were mentioned that were going to be featured or that are featured in the line that have not made appearances yet. And we are now down to 2 issues left. So those being Talon, Vampire Batman, Flashpoint Batman, Hush, and the Batman Who Laughs. So I feel like there could be an explanation for a couple of those. You could knock out Vampire Batman, Flashpoint Batman, and Batman Who Laughs with an alternate universe, a Batverse, if you will, explanation. So maybe that's something that's explained in Jason's origin. But we have Talon and Hush, who I feel like should be major players in an issue, and maybe they're featured in issue number 6. Who knows? But yeah, we're still looking forward to that. Also, wanted to briefly mention I did get the first series of the Batman The Adventures Continue figures in hand. Well, 3 of the 4 in hand. I got the Batman the Animated Series Batman with cell shading. I got the Red Hood figure as well as the Azrael figure in hand, and these things are absolutely gorgeous. I know people have been having a hard time trying to find them and getting them in stock. My recommendation, I picked them up from Big Bad Toy Store, who allows you to pre-order them. They're not a sponsor, but I enjoy plugging them because they're a good friendly business. So check them out, bigbadtoystore.com. Or, I know there are other spots that you can pre-order them, but they are well worth the wait, Liam.
Yeah, absolutely. Been showing off some of them, some of your figure photography on our Instagram page at DCAU Review, and yeah, like I think I said in one of our previous episodes, I was a little on the fence about collecting these at first, but between how much I've enjoyed this comic series, and then seeing pictures that you took of having the figures actually in hand, there's a lot more detailing than I realized, and a lot of cool stuff, especially I think with that Red Hood figure. So it's like, well, that's going that's going in the pre-order list for me. So it's all your fault, but no, but I think I was always gonna start collecting them. So I was kind of late to starting to collect the earlier DC Direct / DC Collectibles Batman the Animated Series and New Batman Adventures figures. I kind of picked and chose which ones I wanted, and so yeah, but yeah, seeing them in person or through seeing them with some of the photos you took and some of the photos other people have taken, those that have been able to get them in hand, it's definitely given me a case of FOMO on that, and I'm definitely looking to pick them up now. So yeah, between the great comic book and then just how cool the figures look, it's given me a lot to think about as far as what I will and won't be collecting going forward.
Well, it seems to me then, for at least in your case, that this series, if it is just a ploy to get people to buy toys, they're doing a good job.
Oh, it worked, yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely
absolutely. And the cool thing is that they're not, secondary prices for a lot of these figures are just astronomical right now. I'm not sure what has caused that. I think some of the limited availability and the excitement and all of that has certainly caused a lot of these original figures to skyrocket in price. But you can, if your eyes are peeled, you can find some deals out there. And the good news is that they've started re-releasing, at least with some variant colors, some of those original figures. So giving new collectors that are looking to jump in like yourself to fill in some holes in their collection the opportunity to catch up here. So hopefully with the success of this, and then hopefully leading to the success more so of the toy line, this will allow us to have many Batman figures from DC Direct based on this series for years and years to come. And with San Diego Comic-Con at home next week, maybe we'll see some reveals of some new figures for this line. Who knows?
Yeah, fingers crossed. And yeah, hopefully these 6 issues won't be the end of this series, because it's been a lot of fun. And I just, you always, as we say, we're always hoping for to be able to spend just a little more time in this universe, and that's whether it's movies or cartoons or comic books. So hopefully everything is pretty successful, and we get more of all of it.
Don't forget to check us out, as we have mentioned on our podcast already. You can check us out on Instagram at DCAU Review. You can check us out on Twitter at DCAU Review. We are constantly talking about all things DCAU, including this series, Batman the Adventures Continue, all things controversial. We love talking about this. Don't forget also, you can subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. That will get your new episodes delivered to you as they become available. We are currently in a month of Static Shock episodes, which we will be wrapping up here this coming Saturday. And then beginning in August, Liam, we will be actually going back to Batman the Animated Series, picking up where we left off. So we are excited. So if you haven't checked out our standard episodes before, make sure you check those out. You'll not want to miss the upcoming episodes, as we have a few that we're excited to discuss in the month of August.
Definitely, and definitely head to that Instagram or to our Twitter at DCAU Review on both. Always love talking about all this stuff with you guys, and hearing theories, try to guess where the series is going next, or your thoughts on episodes that we're reviewing. Always love all that stuff. So be sure to tweet us or message us and give us your thoughts as well on this series, on this Adventure Continue series, the figures, and any other DC or DCAU related content.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for checking us out on this week's bonus episode. We'll be back in just a few weeks with another bonus episode review of Batman the Adventures Continue. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on that next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.